All right. All right. I'm here. I'm here. Better late than never. Let me just jump right into this. In the name of Lord Amen, the Supreme, the All Powerful, the one and only true living force. In Lord Amen, we trust. In Lord Amen, we thank. And in Lord Amen, we continue forward forever. Good evening. I'm your host, the intellectual Lord Benjamin Manhattan. And this is Supreme American TV. And tonight I'm going to be discussing uh, who built North America. Did white people build North America, or did black indigenous slaves build it? Hmm. That's a very good question, because you hear a lot of these white supremacists who sit up here and claim that white men built America. And if it wasn't for white men building America and bringing black slaves here to work, then there would be no America. You see, they always try to spin that narrative, tell that lie, but it is just that, a lie. No white men built America, or what you call the United States of America today. No white men built up the industry and the infrastructure. That was all built on something. Okay. We're going to get off into that. Let me see, check my chat, see if everybody's in here. Hope some of our people came over from Supreme American TV. I was on there the other night, and I was talking about the difference between the Lord and God. I talked about the difference between the Lord and God. And it was a very good show, very good cast. And, I want to continue to, do things like that, you know, go forward more in what I'm doing, as opposed to, I don't want to get stuck so much in the indigenous thing. Okay, we know we American Indians, now what? That's the problem. We'll acknowledge that we American indigenous people, but then after that, then what? What is our next step after we acknowledge that we American indigenous people? That's very key, because us finding out, or rediscovering, I should say, that we are the real American Indians, the real American indigenous people of this land, us waking up and discovering that again, it should be a form of purification for our people. It should be a form of purification from years of being told we were black people, we didn't have no culture, we were niggers, and everything else. We didn't have no real identity. Now we know what our real identity is. We North Americans, North American indigenous people, the real American indigenous, the real American Indians. Not to be confused with Native Americans, like some people get it confused. They really believe American Indians and Native Americans are the same. They are not. They are not. All right. I explained the difference. I said that the indigenous people are just indigenous to that land. The indigenous people are just indigenous to that land and that land mass only. They didn't come from any place else. They were always in that land. Like how people teach that Africa has an indigenous population. People teach that Asia has an indigenous population. People teach that Europe has an indigenous population, right? That is all taught to the masses, but when they get down to America, they try to teach that America doesn't have an indigenous population, meaning the people that have always been here. When they try and teach that, when they try to insinuate that, they said that the so-called Native Americans were the indigenous peoples of America, but then they turn around and tell you that they came from Siberia. They came from Asia. They came from Asia into America. They came from a whole other continent into America. So therefore, they can't be indigenous to America. Simple as that. They can't be indigenous to America if they came from a whole other continent. They can't, how do you come into a place and you call yourself being indigenous? You indigenous to the place you came from, not to that actual country. So the Native Americans are only indigenous to Siberia and Asia. They're indigenous there. They're not indigenous to America. We are indigenous to America because we didn't come from Africa into America. We came from South America into North America. So we basically crossed continents. We came in from South America as the Mayans and the Aztecs. Look that up. You see, they like to ignore this history. When I say they, I mean a lot of these pro-black historians. who really don't know history or research at all. All they do is regurgitate what they hear some Caucasian professors say about Africanism and, ethnogenesis and all that nonsense. You see, they just copy words, they just repeat stuff, because a lot of these pro-blacks, for as much as they talk about being pro-black, they really worship the academic, the pseudo academic scholarship of the white man. I'm gonna just say it like that. The ones who put the DRs in front of their name and the PhD, and they make you think they really know something when they really don't. They don't know history. They really don't. They don't really do any research. They basically repeat. They repeat an academic, study of work. They repeat that and keep repeating it over and over and over again to students and things like that, because that's part of the curriculum. They don't know real history. A lot of them don't even really know that the real American Indians are black people. They don't even know that. All you got to do is do some research. A lot of them really don't know. They actually think that the so-called Native Americans, who are Siberian Mongoloids, they really think these people are indigenous to America. They really believe that. So a lot of times you can't blame people for not knowing stuff. It's when you try to explain to them and they don't want to hear it, because they're more in love with the lie more than they want to hear the truth. They don't want to hear the truth. The truth is what they want to believe, right? Because a lot of people, who, especially the Native Americans, they love to believe that they were first here in this country, that they're the real indigenous people. They love to believe that, but that's just not true. No matter how much they try to make it true, it's not going to be true. No matter how much they try to change history, erase our history, try to take credit for our history here in America, meaning the real indigenous people, the Black Americans, no matter how much they do it, history will always debunk that. Like I said, you don't have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 channels on YouTube simultaneously talking about Black American indigenous people. So I'm using black, so y'all know what I mean. You don't have all these different channels on nightly, constantly breaking down who the real American indigenous people are, so-called black people. Yet I rarely see any of these Native American channels on here that's really giving real history. They're giving that course study that really are false historical statements. You get that course study, but when you get right down to it, when you get right down to the nitty gritty, you start studying the records, you start studying the writings of early explorers when it came to how the American Indians look. They gonna just keep on over and over and over describing so-called black people as the real American Indians. They just gonna keep on doing. I'm talking about your European explorers who were over here in the 1500s and the 1400s, and they traveled extensively throughout the Americas, throughout the Carolina areas, and they tell you when this place was called West India. They called this place India at one time. The English, and I think it was the Spanish. But I think, but anyway, in the Carolina areas, they refer to the Carolina Indians as black people with woolly hair, bushy hair. They didn't say they had straight hair, and they said they had Asian slanted features. They said they were dark skinned. This was Giovanni David Verrazano, who the Verrazano Bridge is named after in New York. One of the early explorers of America for 1524, before the African slave trade. How do you explain that? There's tons more. William Penn talked about seeing Black American indigenous people all over the place. You see the Indians, the Negro tribes of America, you see, because they started classifying our people from Indian to Negro because they were trying to erase our people. They didn't want to say, because everybody knew that Indian meant indigenous or the people of that land. You see, when you say American Indian, you're really saying the American indigenous people, or the people who are not native, but indigenous to the land. That's why, if you notice, why don't the Native American, why doesn't anyone call the Native Americans American Indians? You ever wondered that? Why the Native Americans never called American Indians? Because if they believe so much that they were the American Indian people, then they would stand up and tell the government, we don't want to be called Native Americans anymore, because Native American really is another way of saying an immigrant. A Native American is an immigrant. Okay, a Native American is not indigenous to the land; that's the immigrant to the land. So the first Native Americans were your Siberians, your Siberian Mongolians who came over across the Bering Straits and saw the real indigenous people there, the so-called black ones there, and some of them mixed in with our people. Some of them fought against our people. So it was war going on between us. You even see it on the Bone and Park temples, where you see the original Mexicans of Mexico. They had swords in their hand, and they had who it appeared to be some Siberian or some Siberians with the sword by their neck, and like they was in battle with these people. So who was drawing those pictures of those obvious so-called black men with the what you would call the locks today, and they would have the Siberians on the invaders, the Siberian invaders with the sword to their neck, and they was painting them up with black and white stripes, like what you see how they used to show criminals and people in jail have black and white on in them old movies. They was painting them up in black and white as criminals. You see, ain't that funny? And now black and white, the dynamic of black and white dominates this society. Ain't that funny? Black and white was at one time associated with criminality, and even in the old movies, black and white was associated with criminality. When you had the white suit with the black stripes on it, now that seems to be the dynamic of so-called race here in America, black and white. Go figure, a criminal country. So our people originate really in South America. We originate in South America, and Mexico is Central America. We originate in that continent of South America. Black Americans originate in South America as the Mesoamericans, okay? As the Olmecs, the Aztec, the Inca, the Mayans, okay? And we crossed from South America into North America thousands upon thousands of years ago, when there was nobody in North America, where it was a lot of trees, it was just wild animals running around. It was nothing in North America when we came from one continent of America into North American continent. We crossed over into this continent, and groups of people left, but you had a lot of people that stayed. That's why if you notice in South Central America and all these places, it's more so-called Black Americans there than in North America, because that's really our origin place, not Africa. We didn't come from no Africa. Stop believing this lie that we came from some unknown place in Africa and we came into America. Stop believing that the Olmec statue heads are African. They are not. They are black. So someone just use this term black so y'all understand. They are Black American indigenous statues. You got Black American indigenous people with those faces. Look at George Floyd. George Floyd had an Olmec face. Umar Johnson, Muhammad Ali, all them people, if you look at them, Muhammad Ali, Tariq Nasheed, all them people got Olmec face. I got more of a Mayan face. I got more of a Mayan face. The real Mayans. Not them people who call themselves Mayans today. Them people who call themselves Mayans today, they are Asian admixtures. They are people who were part of the Siberian crossing, or they were brought over because there was two migrations of these people, these Asians. The first migration is when they crossed the Bering Straits from Siberia into Alaska and all into, because at one point in time, Siberia, I think it was in North America is kind of close. I think during the Ice Age, they could come through Siberia into America, into the Americas, right? And that's how a lot of them started coming over here. And they brought the whole breakdown with the tents and stuff like that, like what you saw with the teepees. They brought that. That's part of their culture, teepees. They brought all that over there. The feathered head crowns, like they got from our people. The feathered head crowns that they started wearing came from our people, the real indigenous people. Okay, so when we started leaving South and Central America, and we came as the first people from one American continent, South America, into North America, that's how we got here. That's how so-called Black Americans got here, not through no African slave ship. That's a lie. That's a bold-faced lie. We're not no sub-Saharan Africans. We were always here in America as the Mayans and the Aztec, because the Mayans and the Aztec were the first two major groups of South American or Mesoamericans who came into North America. Those were the real founding fathers of America, the Mayans and the Aztec. They were the ones that started, when they came over here, they broke down, because there was lots of them. I mean, you talking about a huge migration of them. They came over and they started clearing out the forests. They started building homes. They started farming the land, what they was doing in South America, because it's the same land. You could farm, a farmer from South America could farm the land in North America because it's the same soil. It's all American soil. That's how you know it's a lie that they brought us over here just from some Africa just to pick cotton. That's a lie. They enslaved the indigenous people because we know how to grow on the land. We have a history of growing on the land. We was building on the land. I'm talking about real homes on the land, villages on the land in America. You know, the early slave plantations were really captured indigenous villages. They would lady wrote about this. She said that in the slave journals that when the men would go out, this is so-called black indigenous men would go out and go hunting and things like that. The women and children would be in the village, and then a bunch of white men came with some indigenous men, you know, some turncoats, and they came and just raided the village, took it over, and basically built the plantation in. And when the men came back, they would either enslave the men or kill the men. That's how your early plantation started getting set up. Okay. That's how they would go and see the indigenous villages, and they would raid them, take the women, sell them over there, take the men, sell them over, or kill the men off, and put the plantation right there. And you would make the indigenous people slaves. Okay. So imagine this was going on for hundreds of years, right? Where you had indigenous people, indigenous black people, just so you know, using the word black, were being enslaved because it made all the sense in the world to enslave them. Kill off the men, make them, and whatever men that left, you forced them to do the labor. You forced them to do the heavy labor under gunpoint because they couldn't listen, white Americans, or I'll say the British colonists, the colony people, it wasn't a lot of them here, first and foremost. It wasn't a lot of them here. Remember, I told you England was using America as a prison colony. In other words, they would empty out all the jails. When the jails got full, and they got full a lot, they would empty out all the jails in places like England, and they would basically put all the convicts on a boat and just send them to America. Be like, good luck. And they was left to scrounge over here because this was like hell to come over here because they didn't know how to survive here. So they had to come and start getting in tight with the indigenous people. They had to start making friends with the indigenous people so that they could eat and survive because they didn't have no food. They didn't know how to hunt over here. They didn't know how to grow anything. They depended heavily upon the indigenous people helping them. So it's like I said, the indigenous people were feeding their own cancer. The indigenous people were feeding their own cancer. They was letting these Europeans in, taking care of them and feeding them. And most times a lot of our people didn't do that. So a lot of them would end up starving. That's why it really, their society, the United Colonies didn't start being successful. They didn't have the first successful settlement until 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia. Prior to that, like Roanoke and all them other places, they would all fall apart because they didn't have no slaves yet. There was no indigenous labor. And that the indentured service they brought here couldn't do nothing. The European indentured service they brought here, they couldn't do a damn thing. They didn't know how to farm no land, nothing like that. They had to depend on they had to depend on the indigenous black people. It wasn't the Native Americans here that was farming no land, because every time they show you them so-called Native Americans, they show you them with teepees and hunting off the land. You don't never see them farming anything, growing anything. Yet they claim they were such farmers. I'm like, when and where were they ever farmers? When and where were the Native Americans that you see with the straight hair and the Asian features? When were they ever farmers in America? Or lived on the land? They didn't live on the land. They lived off the land. They were living like nomads on the land, and the U.S. government kept pushing them west until they basically started settling them on reservations. That's the history of the so-called Native Americans. When they came into North America, we was already here thousands of years. So they came in here, start setting up teepees on the outskirts, like in the west and places like that, because they came through Mexico, and they would set up a lot of teepees and things like that, start spreading out in that part of the country. Well, a lot of people were more in the like what you see today in the South, up in the North, places like that. We was kind of in the Midwest. We was in places like we was in Chicago, all those places. But they would go, and we was in California. You had California Indians. Our people all over. So they basically stayed on the outskirts. You see, like the Mexico and on those places like that. They was around there, and they didn't really, like I said, they lived like nomads. They wasn't doing no work. So they wouldn't have been good as slaves. Africans wouldn't have been good as slaves. Like I said, when they talk about how they brought Africans into America, they're not talking about North America. You do know that. When they talk about how when the slave narratives go about African slaves being brought into America, they're not talking about North. They're not talking about North America. They're talking about South America and Mexico. They're not talking, even though Mexico is part of North America, but technically, if you talk about the United States and places like that, the furthest they came was in Mexico. That's when the Spanish, the Euro Spanish, they was bringing over Africans. They was bringing over Asians. They would bring over the Africans, and they would, and a lot of the English and I think the Spanish, they was dropping them off in South America. Some of them off in South, but you had indigenous population there too. But they dropped off a handful of Africans in places like South America. They dropped them off in places like Mexico. That's why you have that. If you notice, you have that heavy Yoruba practice in South America, in Central America. That Orisha and all that other stuff. That stuff is not popular in North America. It's not. Unless you got some West Indian family members who brought that over here. But that stuff wasn't popular here in North America because the North American indigenous people, we built a culture here. We actually started building because all the indigenous tribes, all the Indian tribes came from out of the Mayans and the Aztecs. The Cherokee came out of the Mayans. They all started splitting into different tribes and going into different areas, in different sections. The Washita, the Yamasee, right? The Shinnecock, all those people, all those different tribes, so-called Pamunkey, these are all black tribes that they actually don't exist. They act like they don't exist. Now, if the government only accepted 5 indigenous and 5 American, 5 Indian tribes, what happened to the rest of them? And they don't even call those people Indian no more. They call them Native American. Notice that. Because the government knows those people are not the real American Indians. The government knows the difference. If it's the same thing, how come they don't call themselves American Indians today? Why do they call themselves Native Americans? A term that was given to them in the 70s. Prior to that, Caucasians used that term Native American under the Know Nothing Party as the nativists. Right? They don't tell you they don't teach you all this. They don't tell you all this history. Shout out to your Dane Callaways out there, Kareem Howells, and Sacelina YT. I get I'm calling out these brothers because it just goes to show you that all of this information that can be factually checked, all of this information is out there, and I don't see none of these Native Americans combating the information. They just up here calling names, you wabo, you want to be, but then they showing the proof. You can look this up that the real American Indians is black people, is black Americans. They're not African. That again, that's not even a new thing. All they can do is name, troll, and call because they know it's the truth, and they hate that the truth is coming out. Just like the truth is coming out about who really built America. Our people built America. Let me tell you something. When they talk about how white men built America, what white men built America without slave labor? There would be no United States of America without slave labor. You see, hundreds of years of slave labor and not picking no damn cotton. You talking about harvesting cotton, growing cotton. You don't just pick cotton. Cotton just doesn't grow. Caucasians was not growing cotton. They didn't know how to grow cotton. The indigenous black people knew how to grow cotton. Not just pick no cotton, but grow it. You have to know when to grow it and harvest it. Because they made fun of talking about, oh, we brought you black people over from Africa to pick cotton. You got to be a complete idiot to talk about how you would cross the transatlantic ocean just to get people to pick cotton. To say something dumb like that, to even insinuate something dumb. Do you know what it was to travel across the Atlantic Ocean from America into Africa? Y'all immigrants yourselves here. The Europeans were immigrants because listen, white Europeans try to make it seem like they real Americans. They're not Americans. They immigrants like all these other people, like the natives and everything else. So you mean to tell me that one group of immigrants went over to Africa to get another group of immigrants and bring them in here and think that was going to make things better? Did that make sense? You was an immigrant who already down bad, starving over here, not really doing good over here. Basically got a criminal population of people over here that England let loose over here into America because they were treating America like a penal colony. For these Europeans, they were basically dropping them off in our country. They were dropping off these European white criminals in America. And the indigenous people had to fight with these people because as soon as they got here, they started stealing. They started, the male started essaying, as y'all say. doing the R word. They started doing all that to the indigenous women. They were grabbing up the indigenous women and R word in them, you know, graping them. I'm using the term grape. You see, that's what they were doing. As soon as they got off them boats, they started robbing and stealing and graping and trying to force the indigenous people into slavery because they didn't know how to do anything. They didn't know how to grow on the land. They didn't know how to do anything. The indigenous people showed them how to hunt. The indigenous people showed them how to live off the land. The indigenous people, because the Mongolians wasn't here yet. They didn't get here yet. They didn't get here till the 1800s. Some people who you calling Native Americans, they didn't get here till the 1800s. That's around the time the Spanish were bringing them in from Asia into Mexico. Okay, go check all this out. This is historical fact. And a lot of people are not going to know this because you get that made up history, that made up whitewash U.S. history. Yeah, well, the early American settlers, George Washington and them, the founding fathers, you know, they had slavery going where they went and got these Africans and they thought it was a bright idea to bring Africans over here to pick cotton. Didn't I debunk that last week to show you how ridiculous that was? How stupid that sounds. You went and got a bunch of Africans to come out and pick cotton. And then y'all made it seem like it was easy to pick cotton. So why y'all ain't pick your own damn cotton? Why you didn't pick your own cotton? Why you had to involve black people in anything? If you claim you got it, you should have just left us in Africa and made it here on your own. You should have. Why was you chasing down a bunch of cotton pickers who wanted to be free? People who you brought over here. Why would you chase them down when they just want to live their life and be free and not have to work for you? You don't chase down cotton pickers because, as you said, that's an easy job. Just go and pick the cotton. You have plenty of You have plenty of white immigrants that were over here that would have did anything just to eat. You mean to tell me you couldn't get them to pick cotton? Since it was that easy, you couldn't have white people in the cotton fields. Why y'all didn't pick your own cotton and grow your own cotton? Grow your own foods and vegetables. Do your own hunting, because y'all wasn't doing none of that. It was the indigenous black people that helped y'all when y'all was down bad. And when we didn't help you, you started calling us niggers, because that's where the word nigger come from. Niggardly people, stingy people, because we owned all the land. We had all the land because we were actually living on the land. So when you took our villages, when you came as a bunch of marauders and raiders, and you took the villages and you got a bunch of sellout indigenous so-called black people, they weren't Africans here yet because they brought a couple of them over. Like I said, they didn't. I'm not even gonna say really brought them anyway, because you don't really see their genotype and phenotype in America. You really don't. And please don't say, oh, you got African and where? Where? Because again, there's 54 countries in Africa, which means you got all types of different complexions and even deeper, genotypes and whatnot. They're way broader than mine. All right, but they started getting to sell out Indian tribes, black Indian tribes, and they would go and raid settlements with indigenous people, and they would enslave the people or just take their whole land over, and that became the plantations. And they made them stay there to grow and work on the plantation, grow the crops, grow the food. And once they started doing what they was already doing there, that's what fed the economy. That created the economy. The economy was created from the soil. I'm going to say it again. The economy was created from the soil, because that's where your money came from. Tobacco, sugar, right? All kinds of vegetables, but especially cotton. There was another one. What was the blue color that they used to what was the blue color? What's the indigo? Indigo was a dye that the indigenous black people made, so-called black. I'm just so you know I'm saying black. So that was the dye, the indigo blue, which is where they get the dye to do colorful blue jeans, because you do know jeans denim was originally called Negro cloth, which comes from cotton, right? What they call a rough cotton, right? They call that Negro cloth, and our people started making pants and things out of that to work in, because the pants they was working in was really, that soft cotton would tear. So we made a tougher Negro cloth, as they said, out of the denim, which became denim, and our people started dyeing it blue with the indigo. That became another cash crop they don't tell you about, the indigo blue, the dye with. You see, so all this stuff was being harvested by the indigenous Black Indians here, our people, who were captured by the Europeans and forced to work for them. Because again, they could not survive here until 1619, where they officially introduced slaves into the colony. Because when they say in the colony, they mean the places where they stayed in the United States. Because it wasn't all the colony. It was Indian land, which was our land, and the colonies, which is where the Caucasians stayed. So they started capturing the indigenous people. When they say 20 odd Negroes in South Carolina, they changed it now to African American. There was no African American. They changed Negro to African American. The term Negro was given to the American Indian people, the Black American Indians, who are not Africans. That's where that term Negro came from, because you never hear an African being called a Negro. They don't. The white man does not call Africans Negroes. So they're not the same people. Remember I told you that story about Muhammad Ali, where he said that the Africans in 58, when he was in his hometown of Kentucky, Kentucky, he said that he wanted to go into a restaurant to eat, and the restaurant was segregated. So he couldn't go in the restaurant. So he said he saw two Africans, real dark, like blue, black looking Africans, really super dark with they African stuff on. They just happened to be out there. Why? I have no idea. But they came in and they let them eat. They said, let them in. The white man said, let them in. They're not Negroes. Let them in. They're not Negroes. And they was darker than Muhammad Ali. But I thought the Negroes were dark skinned, everybody black skin, dark skin, whatever people. They said, let them in. They're not Negroes, but they wouldn't let Muhammad Ali go in and eat. He told his story. I put it on my TikTok page. So even back then, they know that the Africans were not Negroes. The Negroes are the American Indians, who the U.S. government is really racist against, which is why they won't even let you use that term American Indian in America no more, because the American Indians, meaning the American Negroes, before we became African Americans, they call us American Negroes, and that they changed it because, see, when you put a country in front of your name, like for example, when you say Italian American, the Italians they Italian first, and then they American immigrants. When you say Irish American, they from Ireland as indigenous Irish, but they are immigrants of America, right? Or just like anything, you put a person's indigenous homeland first, and then you put whatever name that they migrated to after that. You see, so when they said American Negro, they were letting you know that the Negro is American. That's what American Negro meant. They were letting you know that the Negro was American, not African. Okay? They were letting you know that. But see, then the people, they say, oh, people starting to think about, so we got to flip this around because we making it seem like these Negroes are American. They're indigenous to America, which they are. We don't want that because that doesn't look good, because we're trying to put our face up, our Caucasian European face up as the American. 1828 Merriam-Webster Dictionary, American, a term that was attached to the copper-colored races that were found here by Europeans, but now is attached to them, the Europeans. Now, in other words, now the Europeans call themselves American, but when they got there, the first Americans, the copper-colored Americans, the copper-colored races, which means our people came in many different complexions, like you see today. You got light-skinned copper-colored people, bronze-skinned copper-colored people, dark-skinned copper-colored people. That's what it meant when it said the copper-colored races. They were talking about ranges of complexion in our people. Indigenous people roaming around with feathered head crowns and everything, who had all kinds of internal and tribal beefs, right? Which is what gave the Europeans the leeway in, because they played both sides against each other, because there was a lot of tribal wars. A lot of tribal wars was going on amongst our people. Kind of think like the Bloods and the Crips, but all over the place. You had a lot of tribal war going on. You had tribes taking over other tribes, erasing other tribes. So the Europeans saw their way by using the aggressive tribes, the aggressive indigenous tribes, the ones who was causing all the beef. They basically armed them with guns, gave them all kinds of weapons from Europe to help erase other indigenous tribes. So then when they erased other indigenous tribes, okay, we're going to take them as slaves, and then we're going to go and take their land. You see, that's how the United States got a lot of this land from the indigenous people. They would use the indigenous people and they would kill off the heads and the chiefs of certain indigenous groups, big indigenous groups. They would secretly go and kill them off, unalive them, as y'all say. And then they would displace the people and use the white and the black raiders, or the what you would say like the police force today. They would use them to go in and take the people's land, go in and ride roughshod over the women, the men, and whatnot. Again, black people was helping them. Why you think that one of the first slave traders that in the United States of America was a so-called black man named Anthony Johnson? You could clearly say he's an indigenous man. He's not African. You could clearly see the guy Anthony Johnson who owned slaves. He was not an African. He was an indigenous black man. You could look right in his face, because obviously he was helping the so-called white man, and there was a bunch of them that was helping the so-called white man take land, set up the union, take land, right, and get slaves. Because remember, I told you the term slave catcher wasn't just people on the plantation that was catching the slaves or run away. It was people who was going out catching slaves. So slave catcher had a dual meaning. It didn't just mean the people who was running, going and catching, riding on the horses, catching the slaves and making them come back. No, it was people that would go out in groups and they would just catch indigenous people and enslave them. Yeah, you go look this up. See, these people don't want to do no real history, man. They rather say they lazy brain people. They would rather believe the African slave trade story and that we sub-Saharan Africans. They rather believe that BS rather than do the real history and the truth. So again, and they wouldn't even try and do all that. After you show them all that, the racist Caucasian ones who talk all that nonsense, who've been miseducated and seem to like their miseducation, the racist Native Americans who've been miseducated and seem to like their racist miseducation, the racist, ignorant, the dumb, simple-minded Pan-Africans, and Umar Johnsonites who like that African slave trade story. But when you get into the real story, they don't want to hear that. They're going after they hear the real story, because trust me, they've heard all this before. It's like they put on headphones. They don't want to hear the truth. They want to believe that we sub-Saharan African, that we came on African slaves. They're going to still say the same thing. The black Muslims say the same lie. I'm gonna just say it like that. I done told certain ones of the black Muslims the truth and whatnot. It showed them proof that we the real American Indians. You know what they said? Oh, well, we still believe it was an African slave trade. I said, yeah, but they didn't come here. It was in South America. They dropped them off. Some of them in South America, a very small number, and in places like Mexico. But they didn't drop them off here. And the Caribbean islands. That's why you see a lot of African-looking Haitians over there. Haitians in Africa, Africans, they dropped a lot of them off in the Caribbean islands, in Jamaica and Haiti. That's where your Africans got dropped off at. Okay, that's where your Africans got dropped. I'm not saying some of our people was on those lands too, but they dropped Africans off, and a lot of the Africans, the small bit they dropped off, mixed in with them. They didn't come into North America. You would see the presence of Africans here if they did. But you could see that African presence in some of the West Indian people. You could see it. You see? And you could also see how undeveloped their land is, that a lot of them got African roots. Because see, in North America, we was developing the land. Don't believe that lie that the white man said about, when they came here, it was nothing in America. That's a whole load of BS. Again, if there was nothing here, then why did you get this so-called black indigenous slaves? How did you get them to slave and build something if they wasn't doing anything? They had to be doing something if they were valuable enough for you to enslave. If they was just sitting around on their ass living in teepees like they claim, and that you went, because how is it that you claim you went to Africa and got a bunch of uncivilized people who didn't know how to do anything. They don't lie and say you taught them anything. You didn't teach them anything. You didn't even want to teach them to read. So all that teaching them trade, you didn't teach them no trades. Okay, that's a lie. Okay, because if y'all had the trades, why y'all didn't build stuff? Why you had to wait for go get Africans to do your work for you? If you had all these skills, these trades, and all this stuff, you had things, then why did you have to go and get Africans who don't know how to do nothing to build for you or pick cotton? That sounds stupid. A bunch of people who you don't even understand, don't even speak the English. You want to get them and make them work. Man, please, man. I told you, Don't believe nothing these people say. They're pathological liars. They're not going to logically break down anything. They're not going to tell you the things that just don't make sense. They're just going to keep lying because the lie makes them feel good. The lie makes racist white males think that America is their country. America was never your country. Y'all Europeans, you're not Americans. And that's not to be disrespectful, but it's the truth. You would not have been in America had it not been for the indigenous black people that was here that built up this country off of our slave labor. Or because again, the economy was built off of slave labor. All the crops that were harvested here went to going over to England, creating a trade here. Again, if we were not valuable, how come we were the first stock traded on the New York Stock Exchange? You were selling slaves on the New York Stock Exchange. You don't sell valueless things. You don't sell no valueless African who don't know how to do nothing. Let me get this straight. Y'all took Africans and took them all the way up to the New York Stock Exchange because New York Stock Exchange is short. Stocks and bonds is short for stockades and bondage because the people in the stockades and in the bond men, they were the slaves and the slave women. They were selling slaves on Wall Street. They would bring them right up into the New York. What's that? What's that river there? And the Hudson River, I think it was the Hudson River. They would bring the slaves up on the boats and would bring them right up, right into Wall Street, bring them up on the stock exchange. That was your first slave. That was your first stock that was being publicly traded. Slaves, us, our people were being traded. So how is it that you get a bunch of worthless Africans who were swinging in trees and studying Islam like that idiot Ben Carson said? How you get them and put them on the stock exchange and make them valuable? People who you got to beat, people who you got to teach how to speak English to understand you. How you going to make money from them? How you going to make money from them? I'm going to try to, please, for the Pan-African slow people, they could keep trying to make this stuff make sense, but it just don't make sense. The math just don't math, as y'all say, if y'all still say that. It don't. You're not going to bring a bunch of people who don't speak the language over into America to enslave and make them work for you, and they don't even understand you. They coming off of boats with all kind of bruises on them, disease and things like that. What are you going to do? Make them pick cotton? You're going to beat them until they learn, understand what you're saying? You're going to be beating them forever. When they're going to work, you're going to keep beating the hell out of them until they pick that cotton and you can say, pick cotton, pick cotton, pick cotton. They're going to, that's not even smart. That's not even smart. Cut tobacco, or whatever. No, you're putting people up on the stock exchange who knew how to do stuff, who knew how to grow food, who knew how to do carpentry, who knew how to maybe drive horses, who knew how to hunt. Those were the people they were selling. Valuable people because the immigrants, they didn't know how to do anything. They needed slave labor. Slave labor was just as much in the North, and it started in the North as it was in the South. Everybody, all these people who can afford to have slaves, they had slaves because the slaves knew how to do everything. They knew how to grow food. The whites didn't know how to grow food. They don't come from an agrarian society. They don't come from an agricultural society. They don't. Their soil in England and Europe is full of soil. They can't even grow food there. A lot of times they were starving. They would eat whatever they could get, whatever animal they could slaughter. They ate a very bad diet. They basically ate whatever they could get their hands on. Pigs, wild boars, whatever potato was growing out of the ground. They ate very poor. Very poor. So when they got here into America, they see all of this vegetation here, all this food here, all these different vegetables and things they never saw before. They started importing that stuff back to Europe. That's how Europe started getting more food source. You see, and that wasn't the so-called Native Americans doing that, because the so-called Native Americans are not farmers. They are not, because they were allowed to own slaves too. What you need slaves for, to do work for you, if y'all know how to do the work yourself? What you needed slaves for? The Native Americans, red masters. They don't even know that that the white man let them own slaves. And I told you the reason why they did that, because when they came over here, the white man was using the red Native Americans, the Mongolians, as slave catchers with them. They would use them as slave catchers and slave hunters with them. That's why to this day, if you notice, a lot of the Native Americans is cool with the racist Caucasians, especially the Aryan ones, because they all the same Asiatic people. The white people are Asians as well. They're Caucasiatic people. Caucasian from the Caucasus Mountains. Okay? But let me go back to this because I veer off sometime. But here's the thing, like I said, that they had the indigenous people who were indigenous to the land, indigenous black people, us, our ancestors, who were always here, going back to the Mesoamericans, going back to the Mayans and the Aztecs. Because all people go back there. All people, the Mayans and the Aztec. You look back at the Mayan culture. You look back at the Mayan and the Aztec culture. They were known for what? Their ball games. They were known for their ball games. Africans are not known for ball games. The Mayans were. They had a damn basketball, what looks like a basketball, who they was throwing a ball through it. And you could see these was all so-called black people. They hide all that, but yet these fake wannabe Mayans today who are Asian admixtures who got some of the features of the original people because, again, they mixed in with the original people. So it would make sense that they would have some of their features. So y'all need to miss us with this whole, putting y'all face next to the a clearly dark-skinned person with locks in their hair. Here it is, y'all got brown admixture Asian in y'all with some of their features and straight hair. Don't even look like the people on the damn wall. Other than you share a few of their features because y'all mixed in. I said y'all are Asian admixtures. You're not the original people. The original people are here in North America today. Myself, my family, our people still, some of them still over there. Y'all not the original people. Mexico was originally a so-called black country. You don't even know that. Before these Euro-Spanish came over here with the Asians, and that's why it started changing. They started bringing them in here. Mexico, go look it up. Mexico was originally a black country. And it was a bunch of people that looked like Mayans it's like Olmecs walking around. And they were not African. They were indigenous to America. Just like we indigenous to America. We didn't come from no African slave trade. We're not part of no ethnogenesis. Tariq Nasheed need to stop making that shit up. I said it. He need to stop making that shit up. There was no ethnogenesis. You said before, Tariq Nasheed said before that, only 3% of Africans came into America. And most of them, I remember he said that most of them went off into the Caribbean and South. They really wasn't bringing them into North America. Now, all of a sudden, there was an ethnogenesis. Now, all of a sudden, all these Africans came in and mixed in with the indigenous people, and you marginalize the indigenous people and make it seem like the African presence was more heavier. Bullshit, Tariq Nasheed. You just making that up. You basically calling us African Americans, but you disguising it under FBA. And I like the content, but I'm going to call out bullshit when I hear it. All the time. There was no ethnogenesis. Stop lying. Just like you trying to sit up here and convince us that we got black skin. We got black skin? No, we do not. Was there an ethnogenesis? No, there was not. Because he clearly always points out the difference was between us and the Africans. If we half African and half American, then how come we don't look like them? How come we don't make the same music as them? How come they don't sound like us? How come we don't eat the same kind of foods? If we were coming from them, if we were half African and half American, what you're trying to resell to us, then how come we don't look like them? How come we don't cook like them? How come we don't do the same things and say we don't hang out together at all? There's no camaraderie between Africans and American and so-called African Americans. There's no camaraderie, none. They don't hang out with us and we don't hang out with them. But we supposed to be part them, right? That makes 0 sense. 0 sense. Man, look, it's time for our people to just start saying, look, man, we American Indians, man. We American Indians. We American indigenous people. We got our own land, our own culture, which makes sense as to why our culture dominates America, because we're the only real Americans. And we're the ones that built America from our slave labor. From our slave labor, we built America. We built the American economy. If there was no American economy, there'd be no America. Hello? This is why I said slaves were valuable. Slaves were valuable. You don't send out groups of people across the country to chase 2, 3 slaves or 1 slave. You don't do that. You chase slaves because they're valuable. You don't want your valuable people to go, because without them, your plantations fall to shit. They go down. They fall down. If these people are not just picking the cotton, they're harvesting and growing the cotton and working in the land. If you ain't got that, then you got no economy. All the economies came from the slave economy. Every economy. You had the railroad companies that owned slaves. And the railroad companies came about because they were transporting food from city to city to city that was grown and harvested by the slaves. What are you talking about? Our people were we were the most valuable thing here, the most valuable commodity here, because we knew how to do everything. The Europeans didn't know how to do anything. The only thing they did was build a system. They built a system to basically utilize our labor. That's all they did. They built a system, but if we were not there to work the system, there would be no system. Hello? How the hell they gonna build America without the machines to build America? Us. We were the machines they used to build America. With no machines, there's no America. They couldn't do it. Every time they tried before 1619, they failed. Do you understand that? You can look this up. They failed when they tried to do it on their own. In their own colonies, Roanoke and all those other places. They failed. They starved. They resorted to cannibalism. Look it up. The Donner Party. Please understand that. You see? Again, they had time to they had time to over hundreds of years, make a slave population. They wanted to make sure they kept the slaves, and they wanted to keep breeding slaves. In other words, when they captured the indigenous people, they would kidnap our people. I told you that's how they got slavery going to. They would kidnap people in the Carolinas, the indigenous people, take them to Mississippi and sell them on auction blocks. They would do that all the time, your slave catchers, and they would get money from the slave masters for doing it, kidnapping them and bringing slaves to market. You see, and sell them off in Mississippi. They get the hell beat out of them. The women get raped and all of that. Next thing you know, you got a slave population. Next thing you know, you making sure that the women are having babies with the bucks that you bringing in, so that the babies will be raised up to go into the plantation. That's what they had created the slave system for. They started mass producing the indigenous people to be slaves, but then they had to, take the Indian out of them. They had to take the fight out of them. You see, this is why they make this lie up that we African, because the Africans are more docile. The Africans are more docile. You see, the Africans, some of them will fight. I ain't gonna say they won't, but a lot of them are real docile. You see it today. You see over there today with a white man that put his foot up the white man up there, kick and smack the Africans around. The Asians smack the Africans around in their own country, and they don't do shit about it. You see, that's why they want to say that we Africans, so that they would hope we adopt that punk ass African mentality. You see, instead of teaching the truth that we was the American Indians and we was giving it up. We was giving it up hardcore to these crackers, man. We was giving it up. We was putting it in on them. That's why they was calling us savage Indians. That's why they was calling us savage. That's why they have this hatred for us deep down, because we was giving it up. We was lynching them and everything, man. We was going ape shit when we was in our right state of mind as the American Indians. But then, of course, they started to Christianize us and Africanize us and tell us that this ain't our country and all this other nonsense. See, a white man built this country. Yeah, with slave labor. You can't build anything without the machine, without the mechanism. We were the machine. If it was not for indigenous so-called Black Americans here in America who was here when saw the white man came here, saw the Mongoloid natives come here, we would sit watching everybody come here and basically take hold of our people, the most valuable resource in the land, the people that did all the work, the people that built the structures. How our people built the damn White House. We built the White House that they sit their funky asses up in. We built the house they sitting their funky white asses up in today. So miss me with we bought some black slaves over from Africa. BS. 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 And anybody that believes that, you need to have your goddamn head examined. So no, and I'm about to wrap this up, but let me say this. It wasn't even a lot of them over here until the 1900s. It wasn't a bunch of Europeans over here till the 1900s. See, they make you think it was a lot of them over here because they were organized and systematically working together. So whenever you got an organized and systemized group of people that's working the system, or as you say, the system of white supremacy, they will dominate a group of people who are basically disunified. Remember, I said they were able to come into America, the Europeans, and get a foothold in America because the indigenous tribes were fighting against each other. The indigenous black tribes, our people, were fighting against each other. And that's not hard to believe because you do it today. You Bloods, you Crips, you Vice Lord, you niggas fight against each other all the time. but you won't stand up against the beast. You won't. You bow down to everybody else, but kill each other. Excuse me, unalive each other. So that's not hard to believe, because the same energy that was on the earth back then is the same energy that's here now. That's why they was able to come and use us against us. They was able to take the turncoats, the ones who was starting all the problem, and use them against us. To take the damn quiches, because you had a bunch of quiches back then, a bunch of bed wenches back then who was selling our people out. Selling their own people out, getting with Brad when he came over here, because a lot of Brads, European Brads, came over here. These dirty, dusty, funky Brads came over here and got with these bronze indigenous, the black indigenous bed wenches, because you had them back then. They was letting Brad on their land, because their land became plantations. You know, a lot of that land was indigenous Indian land, and you had these so-called indigenous Indian women chiefs, or women who had land, who was part of the tribe. They would let the white man come up there, get with him, and next thing you know, she having babies with him. Next thing you know, he owned the damn land. Go look at a movie called Broken Lance. Broken Lance with Spencer Tracy and Katie Girardo. If you get a chance, this movie was made in 1953 or 55. Broken Lance, BROKENLANCE. One of my favorite movies, but it kind of tells you, because the white man was an Irishman. He came over and he ended up getting Indian land. His woman was an Indian, and you could tell they was trying to show that she was a black woman, right? And they had a half breed. It's a good movie. I'm gonna just leave it at that. But anyway, our people built America. Black indigenous Americans built America, not white people. Because again, there wasn't even a whole bunch of them here yet. They didn't start coming over here till after the Civil War. They started bringing thousands upon thousands every year, because their numbers were very small in America, and they started gaining a hold in America, so they wanted to keep what they got. Because keep in mind, they didn't take all of America yet. A lot of them still was just getting into the western part of America. But after the Civil War, they needed to replenish Caucasians here, because it wasn't a lot of them here. It wasn't a lot. They started setting up their system where they had the president, senators, governors, and all that. They had the army, and that was it. But if you really start counting numbers, it really wasn't a lot of them here. They just was more systematically organized, so you would think it was more of them than it really was. You see, that's why they had to add blacks and so-called black indigenous people to their armies in the North, so that they could win the war against the South, because you had black soldiers fighting on the side of the South and the North. You know that? Those were indigenous people. There wasn't no Africans. Those were indigenous men and Indians fighting on them. And again, why don't they call the Native Americans American Indians? Why don't they call them American Indians? The government won't let them call them that, because the government know they're not really American indigenous people. That's why. We built America. Our slave labor built the economy of America. Again, if there's no economy, there's no country. And that's it. So I'm about to wrap this up. I'm going to do my broadcast, and I'm going to go on TikTok, probably like Sunday or something like that. I'm going to do a live TikTok. So I hope some of our TikTok people came over here and enjoyed this. Close this out. But before I do, if you want to become a registered American in the Republic of America, the ROA Worldwide, if you want to sign up and become a registered American, join go to ROA Worldwide and become a part of the real American indigenous community, our community. Because the American indigenous community is our community, not to be confused with Native Americans. We're not Native Americans. We're American indigenous people, separate from them. We're not African Americans. We're not claiming Africa no more. We're not claiming black no more. We're American indigenous people, separate from African Americans or Africans, and separate from Native Americans. So we're not trying to be neither one. We got our own lane now. American indigenous. So join the Republic of America and become an indigenous registered American within the Republic of America. Become an indigenous registered American or a registered American in the ROA Worldwide. And we call out to our people, our bronze skin people. This is a community for our bronze skin people, so that we can network with each other, so we can build together and have a real brotherhood and sisterhood. So I say this is why we need this going forward, so we stop calling ourselves anything other than what we truly are, American indigenous people. We are North Americans. We are South Central Americans all over. So we need to start respecting ourselves as just Americans. So join the Republic of America as a registered American. Please support the American Indigenous Street and Music Festival that's taking place in May 2026. on my page, Ben Manhattan, on TikTok, you can see there's clips of the American Indigenous Street Music Festival. I'm gonna put them up here again. We had a decent turnout. We want to get better and bigger. So those of you who acknowledge that we are the real American Indigenous people, we'd like to ask you to donate $10, $20, whatever. Pledge to donate. We're trying to raise $24,000. We put up a lot of our money last year. We had people who were generous to come and donate. So you can, donate, and I guess it's a tax write-off. I don't know, but we're not a 501c3, but whatever. We want to have something for our children to be able to look to and celebrate. Our people to come and hear good music. We have live music there. We're going to have it again, the stage up, live music. We're going to have music playing throughout. We're going to have vendors there, all dealing with who we are as American Indigenous people. Feathered head crowns there. We're going to have a good time. Saturday and Sunday. It's a 2-day event. The American Indigenous Street Music Festival 2026. So, and check out the American Indigenous TV, run by one of our sisters. Just check that out. It's run by a sister. Man, that's about it. Vinzetta. I'm sorry, Vinzetta. I had a whatever. But Vinzetta Mentangela, check her out. Check out the Dragon Rules, right? What is it? Tired. But anyway, just check it out, right? Draconian Rules. I'm sorry. Check out Draconian Rules. And that's about it. So I'll see y'all back here next Friday. I'll probably pull up something else, and we'll close this out. Namina trust, and Namina thank, and Namina close out this message. Good night.
Fresh to death, I'm loving no show toes.